Today we're going to go over how to use 3D printing to make stuff out of concrete. Before we get to the concrete bit, we first need to create our design. Today I'm making a small plant pot, because I needed one and I thought it was a simple idea to show you. To start with, select everything with A, and then press X to delete. Press 7 to go to a top-down view, and then press Shift A to create a circle. Set the vertices to 512 to make a nice smooth circle, and then set the radius to however large you want your plant pot to be. I'm only making a small pot for cuttings, so I want a diameter of 55mm. That's 27.5 as a radius. You can type in 55 divided by 2 and it will automatically perform the calculation. Press E to extrude upwards. Press Ctrl R to create an edge loop, and then using the scroll wheel increase the number of loops until your mesh is divided into even squares. This is to allow us to have extra detail in the surface so that we can create a texture using the displacement modifier. Go into the Modifiers tab and select a displacement modifier. Click New Texture and then go over to the Textures tab and select Voronoi. Change the distance metrics to distance squared. Then adjust the scale of the texture. Go back into the displacement modifier options and then change the strength to a negative number. Increase it or decrease it until the effect is strong enough. Next you want to create a subdivision surface modifier and place it before the displacement modifier. This is just to increase the number of divisions so that we have a higher resolution. Next, create a duplicate with Shift D, and then use Ctrl A to apply the modifiers in the Modifier tab. Then, move the new model out to where you can see it. What you've done here is you've baked in the modifiers so that we have a mesh that we can edit. Select the top edge loop by holding Alt and then press F to create a face. Do the same to the bottom. Shift S to put the cursor at the centre of the model, and then create a new circle with the same number of vertices as before. Move it upwards and scale it inwards. This is going to be our Boolean object which cuts the hole into our plant pot. Extrude again downwards and then scale inwards to create a tapered shape. This will make it easier to remove the mould later. Select the cutting object and then the plant pot and hold Ctrl and press minus. I'm using an add-on called Bool Tool, which is in Preferences and the Add-ons tab, which is a really useful tool to quickly do Boolean operations. Unfortunately, it defaults to exact in the settings when what we need is fast. Create a new circle and scale it inwards very slightly. Extrude it upwards and then scale outwards. What we're doing is we're trying to create a 45-degree line which cuts through the base of the shape. Extrude the whole thing down to create a new Boolean object. The reason I'm doing this is that it's often best to create a small chamfer on edges, especially with concrete, because it will create a more durable edge. Perform the Boolean operation again using Ctrl minus, and then set it to fast. That's our plant pot. Now we need to create the mould. Create a new circle, scale it out, and then press F to make a face. Extrude it upwards in the Z axis. Delete the top face, and then add a solidify modifier. We're going to set this to 1, as in 1mm. It says meter, but I'm working in millimeters. Basically, that's all that needs to be done. This is just meant to be a little cup which holds the silicone around the model. One more thing that I forgot to do when I first recording this was select even thickness in the Modifiers tab. Next I'm going to go into Cura. I've exported my model as an STL, and now I'm just going to print. Everything looks fine. There's nothing special about the way you have to print this, just print as you would for any other model. So now we want to use the 3D print to cast the mould for our pot. It's quite simple, just mix some liquid silicone in the specified amount. This product is a 100:1 ratio. Pour the silicone onto the print. From here, you're going to want to agitate the silicone by tapping repeatedly and otherwise vibrating it. This will cause the trapped air bubbles to be released and rise to the surface. If you don't do this, you might get bubbles and flaws in the mould. Come back the next day and your mould should be set. To extract the mould, I had to destroy the original print, unfortunately. That was fine with me, as I wasn't planning on using it again. From here, it's just a matter of mixing the concrete and pouring it into the mould. Mixing concrete might be a bit more complicated than you think. If you put how to mix concrete into Google, you're most likely going to get results aimed at construction use, which is not appropriate for our purposes. Every concrete mix is made from cement, aggregate and water. Sometimes additional modifiers or chemicals are added to adjust its properties. The aggregate doesn't significantly alter the reaction, but is there to reduce the amount of cement necessary, as well as to improve the strength of the concrete by making its internal structure less homogeneous. The type and amount of aggregate depends on your use case. In construction, they like to use a lot of aggregate, typically large chunky gravel as well as sand, to make the strongest concrete possible while using the least amount of cement. This won't work for us as we want to produce fine detail. Gravel simply won't fit within the mould. What I found to be best is a 1-to-1 mix of cement and sharp sand. Sharp sand is a particularly coarse and jagged sand which is great for strength as it gives a good texture for the cement to bond into. Mix it with a small amount of water. I can't give you a specific amount as the water content within your sand will affect how much you will need. Simply add a small amount at a time until it's about this consistency. You want it to be liquid enough to flow into the crevices of the mould, but no more. Any excess water will create weaknesses within the concrete. Now pour the concrete into your mould. As before, agitate the mould to cause bubbles to rise to the surface. You might also want to push a small toothpick around in the corners to force out any additional bubbles. Now simply wait for the concrete to set. If you're using standard cement, you should wait at least 48 hours before removing the mould, but it will continue to harden and lighten in colour over a week. If you can't wait that long, fast setting cement also exists. These include some of those chemical modifiers that I mentioned earlier. You'll be able to remove the pot from the mould within a couple of hours. This concrete will likely be harder than the normal stuff. There is a downside though, those extra additives tend to cause blotches and spots on the surface. That's it. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing.